And I was so angry that they really would try to stop this meeting without taking everybody's information, without listening to everybody's story about how they only have 90 days left to their unemployment, and they've already extended it 3 times, you know, and he has the nerve to try to leave. So we have Glass-Steagall now, right now, yelling it out, passing out flyers to everybody and anybody that was in the audience, and then they had to not leave. Then they had to take notice. And, you know, I mean, they could have done all kinds of things. I was like, well, you know, I really could have gotten arrested or anything. But it's like, you have to do this. And when you go to these things and you find out your strength, okay, it propels you to come up with ideas, creative ways to really fight these people and get Glass-Steagall passed. And I think Dawn's song is fantastic. You know, we have so many creative people. Find your creativity, find your strength. Let's join with each other and get this done. Thank you.
My name is Rod McFarlane. For many years, I've been involved with the liberal movement, and I've known a number of liberals. I want to comment on and ask the question to you about the change in the liberal community. What was liberal under FDR and before the Kennedy assassination was a free and open community which made open inquiries, which listened to all arguments, all sorts of ideas. In other words, there was no restrictions. All of a sudden, and especially after the Kennedy assassination, there came this group that called themselves liberals. They alleged themselves to be liberals, but they weren't. And they're still in power today. They're not really liberal. Their whole concept of operation is in a way that they're with the party line, and if you're not with their party line, then you're condemned. I've had several fights with them, and I've sort of been outlawed within the liberal community to a certain extent. And I've had friends who've been there for a number of years. Most of my friends who are of the older variety of liberals, this is pre the Kennedy assassination, these are people going way back, still have fairly open minds and still question things. They do not take for granted the policies of global warming as they've been stated, and other, you know, by a lot of people in different political organizations that claim to be liberal, and they don't take some of the policies of some of these things out. There's a lot of questions. The significance of how the liberal community has been usurped and used for people who have an agenda that LaRouche has outlined and gone into, and what this is doing to the society is of significance, because it's my personal feeling, you don't have any real liberals left in America today. And I'd like to have some comment on that, especially. Yes.
Well, there's 2 things. I mean, one, in part, yeah, it's changed, because what happened with the shift in the 60s is you had this idea of freedom and tolerance get taken over by a thick overlay of cultural pessimism. However, I would say actually there was always a problem. The idea of liberalism is a British idea, and it actually goes back to Sarpi. Yeah. Because the idea of Sarpi is you cannot know truth. The human being cannot know truth. All you have is pleasure and pain. And it's insidious because it's a foot in the door, because then you say, well, don't I have to hear all the opinions? Don't I have to respect someone else's opinion? And the problem is, no, you don't. Because if someone is persisting in an opinion which is mistaken, like the guy who says you don't have to worry about getting the girl out from in front of the truck, you don't have to respect his opinion. In fact, if he tries to prevent you from rescuing the child, he probably should go to jail, or you'd be justified in punching him in the nose. So there's the idea of it as a concept is problematic because it's a denial of the creativity of the human individual, the human mind. Sarpi's argument is that universal principles are simply a construct of the mind, that the mind, that it's all in your head, and it doesn't have to do with the real universe. Whereas when you're looking at Vernadsky, and what's becoming more and more clear in a really exciting way is the question of the relationship of the universe to the mind. And it's true, it is the mind which allows us to know the principles of the universe. But the mind is also part of the universe, and it's a part of the development of the universe, and it's intelligible. And so the whole problem with liberalism per se, when you get in this idea that everyone has an equal right to their opinion, is then you don't have truth anymore and you can't have progress. And I would say that this was explicitly attacked, and some people are familiar when we wrote that book, The Children of Satan, with Dick Cheney on the cover. On this Congress of Cultural Freedom, which was created at the end of World War II by a group of very evil individuals out of London, some out of New York City. Henry Luce, the editor of Time magazine, which put Mussolini on the cover 3 times as Man of the Year. And the idea was, how do you make sure that, because they were really bothered, you know, all of Europe went fascist, right? You had Hitler, you had Franco, you had Vichy France, you had Mussolini. That is, the response in Europe to economic hardship was the default setting, which is the hierarchical society, the kings, the queens, the duchesses. You're only whatever you're born into. Whereas the United States, because of this kernel of true principle on which our nation was founded, when you had an economic depression, Americans did not choose fascism. We chose FDR, as much as Wall Street tried to stop his nomination and to assassinate him before he was inaugurated. And so the question was, how do you destroy that identity? And so the Congress of Cultural Freedom launched a whole bunch of projects, including the Beatles, which were heavily funded and introduced into the United States, including things like MK Ultra, where they put drugs in students' drinks at all the Ivy League schools, you know, experimentation on human beings, mind control. And people like Theodore Adorno, who wrote books, so-called, on classical music, who said, you've heard the line that genius and insanity are sort of the same thing, right? The genius is not, if you're a genius, you're like borderline insane. So they tried to say Beethoven was insane. Beethoven didn't know how to write a fugue, that it's not intelligible, that it's not true that every human being has the potential to become a genius. And the thing about LaRouche, which is why I think they've considered him such a threat, is not the particular policies, but because he made his life's work the question of making creativity intelligible. That is, how do you liberate the population from the shackles of a fixed way of thinking? And you think of any true scientist. A true scientist is actually delighted if they discover that everything they believed was wrong. Now, you have to say to yourself, how many of us have an ego that would take that kind of delight? But a true scientist finds it delightful when you make a discovery that everything you thought about how the world works actually didn't work that way at all, and you've stumbled upon some new principle. And LaRouche's point is that this is not arbitrary. It doesn't happen in an opium dream. It's not because, you know, you smoked pot and you get, your creativity is liberated. No, this is absolutely intelligible. And a sane society would foster this from one generation to the next. So in a sense, it's true in a different era to be liberal was not as clearly fascist as it is today, but in fact the idea of liberalism is that foot in the door, where you say, I have to respect everyone's opinion equally. And the truth is, and it's very clear right now, that you do not, should not, and must not respect everyone's opinion equally, because some people are wrong.
I have another question that's is leaning more towards philosophy than actual, you know, tangible science. I remember my roommate, I actually tried to organize him to, you know, be here, and he also confirmed one of the beliefs that I thought was sort of running rampant in the society about this, you know, I remember Jerry gave me they schooled me on this. He said something about this guy named Saul Alinsky, and sort of like implementing this policy of making people believe that they can only do things in their community, like they have to start in their community first and then build up towards the higher levels of policy making, which I thought was, you know, I think it's brutally insane, because all these things, they're all, it's like, I don't know, the only way I can compare it to is like the gods decree at the very top that things are going to happen, and then it just rains down from there, as opposed to like the farmer in his village saying, yeah, we have to organize here first, or then we could just, you know, kind of talk to the gods and say, hey, maybe, you know, you could like give us some rainfall next year, which is obviously not going to happen. And he mentioned this thing about Socrates, and I think maybe it's the trivium. I don't know if it goes back that far, you know, because I remember reading The Death of Socrates and him being, what was it, being blamed for corrupting the youth, which is supposed to be the charge, which is total bullshit. And I'm also seeing the same thing reoccurring now, is that, you know, with the LaRouche movement and giving people a different schooling in the youth movements as opposed to what's being taught in the colleges and universities, and you guys being attacked for it. So I think it's the same situation, or probably just a continuation of the same struggle. So how can I also apply this myself? How can I teach that to other people who are going to come before me, the newer generation before me, so I can create a mass mobilization in my area?
Yeah, just from what you brought up about the narrow path, I think that really is the key. One is the role of the music, training young people to think through singing classical music. That's how you develop scientists, for one. Your mind is forced to think in a different way when performing classical music. So that's just one that's indispensable. And two, I don't think there's like a specific like rule book or something for things you need to work with people. I think it just comes from the intention.
Like I said before.
Yeah, I think you're just on the right track of thinking about using the Platonic method, how to get someone to realize for themselves what it is about their thinking that's wrong. I think you're going at it with the right method. Just do more of it.
Yeah, I think there's just a real disintegration in the culture. I just think that there's a real disintegration in the culture with their method of thinking, and you know, sort of like there's an underlying, well, not an underlying, but there's an overt aimlessness in society. People usually reduce it to like their paychecks and their personal struggles, but they don't see it as being a whole, you know, I guess, systemic flaw in society. Like the entire foundation is crumbling, but people are worrying about the small cracks in the walls.
Yeah, and we just have to cast a wide net. People are ready to respond right now. So don't worry if, like, you know, a certain number of people don't respond, and there is a problem with the youth generation that they grew up on computers and things like that in MySpace. So that is true. So don't worry about it if a certain, especially the younger age group of people between like 16 and, you know, 22 or something, some of them are just out of it. And they're not the way that we're going to save it, you know, civilization right now. We're going to save them through the process of transforming society. The better ones will be drawn to us simply by what we're doing. And so just be ready for those guys.
Hang
Cast the wide net. Yeah.
Thank you.
And the other thing that I would like to answer to this gentleman is that I think if you show the youth, at least the ones that will listen to you, because, you know, unfortunately, not everybody's going to listen to you no matter who they are. All right? You can preach, you know, for 100 years, and there are some people that will just never care. And they're going to have their own ideas, and that's it. But if you tell people the truth, some people will get it in their heads that this is the right direction to go in. All right? I have my own ideas. When I heard about this, I said, wow, this makes sense to me. And, you know, I think it's something that I can go with. And I think if you teach them to believe in themselves and not care about being part of the crowd, and not care whether somebody over there is going to be their friend because they won't follow in that direction, but be the leader, not the follower, that you will get a lot of young people to follow what you believe in because they'll want to be leaders, not followers. And I think people like this woman who's a teacher, because unfortunately a lot of teachers are teaching them the wrong things. But you have people like this in the schools that can help to teach young people, will be okay. Thank you.
I just wanted to say one thing in response to Ann Lee. It reminded me of another bumper sticker. The one that says, think globally, act locally. Every time I see that, I think it means make sure you go in the toilet. I mean, it's just, you know, and it does get at why we need people to act, because LaRouche asked 6 of us to run for Congress. And his intent was not for us to suck up and slither around and try and, you know, make somebody like us and worry about getting votes in some little district. I mean, first of all, the election is until November of 2012, and who knows if we're going to have a country by then. But second of all, he said after November 2nd of last year that we had a horrible crisis in leadership because the population went out very angry at Obama, and they voted for all of these really crazy people like Rand Paul, who doesn't think we should have a government at all. I mean, you wonder why some people run for office. If there's so much against the government, why don't they just not run? But anyway, so what happened was the population became even more pessimistic because they said, well, I didn't like what Obama was threatening to do to Medicare, and so I thought I was voting against him, and now we have a bipartisan group attacking the middle class. And so LaRouche said, look, the 6 of you have to function as a steering committee for the current Congress. So here we are. We don't have an official title. I mean, we're the LaRouche Democratic slate, but we're not in office. But his conception was, as candidates, we should act like we're the actual Congress. And we should tell the so-called Congress what they're supposed to be doing, and we should lead by example. And that's the spirit from which everyone in this room can act, that you go to the city council and you are the city council. You go to see your congressman, you are the congressman. Right? That's the leadership that everyone in this room can take and can bring to the table, and that will smash through the pessimism of your friends and neighbors because they're going to see you standing up and not acting like a lemming. So that being said, everybody here, please see our organizers. You can look back, they're all standing there or sitting in the case of Margaret Sheldon. Sign up, give us your time. And as I said in the Declaration of Independence, your life, your fortune, and your sacred honor. And let's get the job done. Thanks.